we have the wiping out of the oceans. I don't think people realize, actually, that I just was reading about this the other day. The oceanographers today are saying that the oceans are on the brink of collapse. We are just overfishing them. We are so good at fishing. I mean, every year since the late 1980s, the capacity of the fishing fleet worldwide has just increased every year, and yet every year since the 80s, the number of fish, the pounds of fish that are caught has gone down because the fish are gone. So 2/3 of the fish we're eating are factory farmed. So, but just in general, there's a rapacious appetite for fish because we're not just eating fish ourselves directly. Scientists discovered a long time ago that if you feed fish to pigs, cows, and chickens, that it's profitable. They give more milk, they get fatter, they give more eggs, all this kind of stuff. So fish meal. So feed is enriched with fish meal. So even though it's comical, probably to most of you, to think of a cow trying to jump into a stream to catch a fish, cows actually eat more fish in the United States than human beings do, because it makes them give more milk and fattens them up. And so the system is in place, essentially, which is hidden from us, which is devastating the oceans. We have a situation where the oceans are literally dying. Most of the large fish species are completely gone, and we see just enormous devastation because now we're factory farming fishes, which is even more toxic than factory farming animals, and so just for profit, and the toxins all concentrate in the fish, right? So fish concentrate PCBs and heavy metals and lead, mercury, and cadmium, as well as nuclear waste, which is becoming a really serious problem. All the stuff concentrates in the flesh of fish, and so anyone eating fish is getting a huge dose. They concentrate, millions of times more than in the water surrounding them very often, or at least hundreds of thousands of times more. And then this fish is also fed to cows. They don't just feed, cows are designed to eat grass, but they don't just feed them grass. They feed them grain to make them give more milk and fatten up and so forth. But they don't just stop with grain. They feed them the flesh of animals, fish primarily, but also other livestock, as well as chicken litter. And so cows and pigs and chickens, roadkill, dogs and cats, all this stuff is fed to cows. So when we're drinking milk, we're getting all of that, right? It's all in the milk. It's in the dairy. It's in the cheese. We're getting huge amounts of pesticide residues and all of the hormones and so forth that the animals are given as well. But this is devastating to the ecosystems, to the oceans, to the ecosystem of our own bodies, obviously, as well. And yet we wonder why we have epidemics of cancer. We wonder why we have the devastation of oceans. It's very obvious. Animal agriculture does it. It does it very well. And we have huge industries getting very rich on this. We have a war industry. We have a hospital, pharmaceutical industry getting very rich. But for us, the people, we're not told about this. We just go along and think that this is good food for good people. And the idea is to realize that at this point, because of animal agriculture, which essentially is a war against nature, we are at the point where we're causing the mass extinction of species more than ever. I mean, more than 65 million years. We're cutting down rainforests now at the rate of about an acre per second. The driving force behind that is the same thing. People taking out their wallets and paying for meat, dairy products and eggs. That's sending a vote to cut down an acre per second of rainforest, because we're cutting down the rainforest in the Amazon to grow soybeans. That's the reason. We're growing soybeans to feed to factory farm pigs, cows, chickens, and factory farm fishes eat huge amounts of soy also. So all this stuff is to feed us, but when you cut down rainforest, you're not just cutting down a few trees, you're cutting down ecosystems that took millions of years to develop, so we're wiping out species. So we're losing, we don't know. I mean, biologists do not know how many species are going extinct every single day, but the estimates are high. I mean, over 100 probably every day, 150, 200 species every day are going extinct because we want to eat meat, dairy products, and eggs. So we're destroying the genetic diversity of planet Earth because we want to eat meat, dairy products, and eggs. We have to understand that this has massive ramifications, not just for these other beings who are driven into extinction, beings we don't even know who they are, but for us. How can we expect to live here when we cause everything else to go extinct? We will also do the same thing, and we can see this happening. And yet, what animal agriculture does, not only is it the most devastating thing to the planet by far that we do, it also devastates, again, our capacity to make connections, and so we just go along, keep doing it. We don't want to think about it. We just don't want to think. Don't tell me. I don't want to hear about it. So, essentially, I think the goal, really, essentially for us as human beings on our planet today, is to somehow free ourselves from this toxic program that's been injected into us since we're little children to see certain beings as food, to have an eye of a predator. I'm going to attack and kill you because I've been told to do that. Well, we don't do it ourselves. We just vote and pay for someone else to do it. But we have to realize if I pay someone else to do it, I'm responsible, essentially. I am responsible, even though I'm just following orders that came from my mother and my father and my minister, probably not Ron, but other ministers. We're following these orders. They come from every institution in our society, and so we think we're not responsible, right? Well, I'm just doing what everybody does. I'm just following, because we have to realize when we leave here and we go out and we see people going to McDonald's and Burger King or going to the grocery store and buying meat, dairy products, and eggs, no one is doing those things, even though they cause horrible violence and misery to animals and ecosystems, destroy everything. No one's getting up in the morning going, I just want to ruin everything today. I'm going to go out and buy. No one's doing that. People are getting up thinking, I want to do some good things today. I'm going to have a burger. So we have to realize anyone who's eating meat, dairy products, and eggs is only doing it for one reason. There's only one reason. We're doing it because we're following orders. We're just following. We have the blinders have been slapped on us from the time we're little kids, and we're just going along with the program. We don't want to ask questions. It's very easy to go along. That's what everybody's doing. So we just all do it. So the thing to understand is the power of community. And that's one of the things I love about religious communities, spiritual communities, is there's a sense of the power of community. And community can be powerful for two things. It can dumb us down, can make us do horrible things to other people, and animals are people, or it can help us awaken from the trend. We can create communities of awareness, communities of kindness, communities of intelligence and respect that can help us create a society of peace and freedom and justice. It's absolutely possible. There's nothing stopping us. It's just simply the communities that we've been born into and the fact that we're following the orders that came from those communities. So again, I want to emphasize the underlying enormously positive message here. Even though what we're doing to the earth is horribly disturbing, if we're aware of it, the enormous suffering of just cutting down. Can you imagine all the chainsaws just cutting down forests and destroying, and these poor, and factory farming fishes, and we're factory farming salmon, tuna fish. These are animals that swim 40 or 50 or 60 miles an hour, leaping through the air. They're stuck in cages their entire lives. The cruelty and violence in animal agriculture, we can't even begin to imagine the suffering these beings go through. And we have to also remember, I think, that the interests of animals are to them as important to them as mine are to me, right? This is something that's very important to remember. Like when we look in the eyes of an elephant, we can say, well, that's just an elephant. Who cares? I mean, it's not a human being. It's just an elephant. So we can do what we want because it's just an elephant. But how many of you have had a companion animal at some time in your life? It's like a dog or a cat or something. Yeah. So you know that these animals, so-called animals, have interests. They have interests that are to them as important to them as my interests are to me. They do not want to have their tail stomped on, or like, oh, get off my tail. They don't want to be locked in a closet and forced to live in their own excrement like we do to so many animals, or be raped on rape racks and have their babies stolen. I mean, all these things, of course they don't want. But we are raised in a society where we learn to say we don't care about them. We exclude them from the sphere of our kindness and compassion and respect because that's what we do. We're taught that. The most powerful way possible, through rituals. The most powerful ritual in any society is the meals. So mealtime rituals carry these messages at a very deep level, right? We're eating it. You don't get more powerful in ritual than eating something. So this is the basic idea. And then as far as the environmental, I'm finished with that. I'll go into the cultural and then the health quickly, and then go into the inner. So the cultural aspects of this, just briefly, I think are important. Just, again, I'm trying to do this briefly. The cultural, the problem with animal agriculture, again, is it's so incredibly wasteful and inefficient. We could feed everyone on this planet on a fraction of the land. That's the good news. We understand this. We could feed everyone on a fraction of the land. Everyone could be eating, all 7.2 billion of us. We could have the forests coming back, the oceans coming back, the rivers coming back. We could feed everyone. It doesn't need a lot of land to grow huge amounts of food. We know how to do that. But if you want to have animal agriculture, that takes a lot of land. I mean, according to the United Nations, it's 30 to 1. In other words, 30 people eating a plant-based diet use as much fresh water as one person eating a standard Western diet. And water is becoming incredibly important, like oil. So there's enormous good news in that. We could massively reduce the amount of fresh water we're using. We don't have to have these freshwater dilemmas if we would stop eating meat and dairy. But we don't want to do that. We don't even talk about that. Finally, the United Nations just recently came out with a study. Did you see that recently? The United Nations, they said that the only way to solve the problems on this planet is for everyone to go vegan. I mean, they actually just came out with that. So it's, it's starting to, it's so obvious. I mean, we should have been talking about this, 50 years ago, but, the resistance is enormous. But anyway, but the cultural dimension, as I said, the fact is that it's so wasteful of resources, and so no one argues the fact that every year we grow enough food to feed between 12 and 15 billion people. 12 and 15, and how many people? 7.2? So how is it possible that we have roughly 1 to 2 billion people every single year dying of starvation, going hungry? Our own brothers and sisters are starving. Well, we're growing enough food to feed twice as much population as we have. Again, it's because what I've been saying. And the reason behind this essentially is that most of the grain we're growing and the legumes, like soy is a legume, we're feeding to these animals and then eating the flesh and secretions of these animals. And it's essentially the wealthy people who are doing that, mostly. I mean, this is the point. So this is a system of violence committed by wealthy people, or people that are raised in industrialized nations. So it's not that we're bad people, it's just the basic fact is if we're living in an industrialized nation, we have a relatively high-powered economy. It is not difficult for us living in this high-powered economy to drive up the price of grain on the world market to a point, and we're feeding it to our pigs and cows and chickens and factory farm fishes, and they're getting plenty to eat. They're eating huge amounts of grain, massive amounts of grain, and they're making all this, milk and eggs and flesh that we're so-called harvesting. And yet we've driven up the price of grain on the world market to a point that's just too high for people who live in less industrialized nations who don't have high-powered economies. They can't afford that. They don't not make that kind of money. And plus the fact they're being driven off the land by policies by multinational corporations and large financial institutions and governments and the World Bank and the IMF and so forth. So they are in the position where they're seeing their babies die in their arms of starvation, and they can't afford the grain. And so these mothers see these other people over here, not far away, basically taking most of the grain, most of the land, most of the water, using all the petroleum, creating all the pollution, and eating so high off the hog, eating all these very rich foods. And that's a recipe for conflict. If you study peace, peace studies, the fundamental allegory, the fundamental principle is there will never be peace without justice. And yet animal agriculture is massive injustice, not only massive injustice to animals who are killed and eaten, and I didn't even mention to wildlife, I mentioned a little bit to wildlife, but to other human beings who are starving because we are eating most of the grain, not directly, but indirectly by eating meat, dairy products, and eggs, and we're causing that kind of starvation and hunger and the suffering that causes, and that's, as I said, a recipe for great profits for the weapons industry, right? The weapons manufacturers, they're guaranteed there's going to be constant wars and conflicts. When you have that kind of inequity, it's guaranteed. And then on top of that, two other things. One is that while these people in less industrialized nations are suffering from the diseases that come from hunger and malnutrition, the people who live in the other nations, the more industrialized nations, are suffering also, ironically enough, from the diseases that come from eating huge amounts of meat, dairy products, and eggs, actually grains and so forth that have been converted. And so we have those diseases that everyone knows about, like diabetes and osteoporosis and obesity and heart disease and hypertension and liver disease and kidney disease and breast, prostate, and colon cancer and diverticulitis and all these different prostate problems and the Parkinson's and dementia and autoimmune disease. All these things that we see our hospitals are just, the pharmaceutical industry are just making huge amounts of money on, are driven by this well understood now, driven by diets that are rich in meat, dairy products, and eggs. And so this is the underlying dynamic. And then the other element that I think we have to factor in here, which is not very pleasant to contemplate, but I think it's important just to be aware of it, in ancient spiritual teaching, and I think it's important to understand this, that everything we're talking about here is essentially a teaching that has already been articulated by every world religion, I think, essentially. The fundamental teachings, I would say, of all the world religions, if you could distill it down to one sentence, would be something like this: whatever you most want for yourself, give that to others. Whatever you most want for yourself, give that. As we live that way, as we live a life of kindness and mercy and tenderness to others, we will find that happening. If we want to be loved, then to be loving. If we want to be free, then to free others. This basic wisdom. Another way of saying it is whatever you sow will come back. Another way of saying it is the golden rule, in a sense, that to do unto others, obviously, as you would like to have done unto you. So this basic teaching, I think, connects us to a possibility that we have to question our routine mistreatment of animals for food, because not only are we causing enormous suffering to the animals and to hungry people, but also to the workers, to cause another to do terrible things. It's not good to do that. It is not a good idea. It's really not a good idea to do this. Madeline and I, as we travel, we've been to slaughterhouses, factory farms, stockyards, and these places, Amarillo, and a lot of places. It's the worst possible job anyone can have, to stab animals all day, or to impregnate them on rape racks all day, or to masturbate the males and get their sperm. And the whole electroshocking, beating, stabbing animals all day, it brings out the very worst in people. How can we have a society where we say we want to have peace and freedom and justice, and yet every day we're paying people to do work that is degrading and violent, and the hideous, most violent, horrible things that they're doing? And these workers have the highest rates not only of worker-related injuries, but also of suicide, drug addiction, alcoholism, spousal abuse, and child abuse. They have what psychologists refer to as perpetrator-induced traumatic stress disorder. They're perpetrating. When we pay for something, we think it's innocent. I'm just going to the restaurant. I'm just ordering prime rib. It's totally innocent. And probably when that happens, the wait person will say, "Oh, you're a really smart guy. You're getting prime rib. That's really delicious." They don't say, "You barbarian, what are you doing? Don't you know you're causing so much suffering to animals and people and starving people? You should stay. That's terrible." And but we don't get the feedback. So I think it's important for us, if we're really serious about, what are we serious about? About living authentically, about creating a culture where peace and freedom are possible, any of these things, to look deeply into our actions as a society when we have workers that have to do this work and are traumatized, and they go inflict trauma on others. And one of the things I guess I realized in this whole thing is that the one thing that animal agriculture is more than anything is it's trauma. It's a massive trauma. It's traumatic to the animals. We know that. I mean, it's chronic and acute pain and terror that's inflicted on these poor animals that we then eat and feed to our children. But it's trauma for the workers. It's trauma for the environment. It's trauma for our bodies. Trauma, it's on every level, it's trauma. And so the important thing to understand is that we don't have to do that anymore, right? We can question that. And the beauty of this is, it's not just a critique of a system that's violent and abusive, but we have a wonderful alternative. We have the food truck, a vegan food truck out here, right? We can live in a way that's much healthier and more harmonious, and we can employ and create a system that's completely different. I love about Minister Fuller how he said, I think there's a lot of truth to it. He said, it's not a good idea really to fight against an abusive system. You can do that. You can fight and try to attack, but it'll hit you back. The best thing is to just create an alternative and just put your energy into something positive and create something of love and kindness and caring and mercy and health and sustainability, and just go for it. Create something positive. And that's why I love, in a sense, the vegan message. It's saying we can live just as healthy. And we're finding that vegan food, for example, is now becoming known. I mean, even if none of this was true, even if it was just fine to eat meat and dairy from the point of view of the environment and cruelty and all that stuff, which totally isn't. But just plant-based foods on their own are amazingly delicious, right? You can just do it on that just because of how good it is. And actually, once you realize what you're actually eating when we eat the flesh of animals, it gets even more delicious to not eat it. But anyway, so the point to understand here is that to our culture, animal agriculture is devastating to peace, to freedom. It creates trauma, webs of trauma. Martin Luther King said, violence anywhere hurts everyone everywhere because we're all interconnected. And what veganism is about essentially, and this whole vision we're talking about here, is essentially saying the same exact thing but saying it the other way, which is kindness and compassion anywhere blesses everyone everywhere because we're all interconnected. Each one of us can be a voice for and a force for healing and blessing our world. As far as the health goes, I have a chapter in the World Peace Diet, it's actually the longest chapter, called The Intelligence of Human Physiology. I won't go into this more than to just say, basically, if you look at our physiology, you just ask the question, what are we designed to eat? Just look at our physical body, our teeth, our saliva, the shape of our mouth, our jaw, which goes side to side. All of these things are dead giveaways. The basic shape of our digestive system, the pH of our digestive acid, the length of our The digestive tract is very long, it's convoluted. I mean, we have a circulatory system that does not tolerate saturated fat. It becomes clear, obvious, very obvious, that we are not designed to eat meat and dairy. I mean, we can do it, right? You can eat meat and dairy. You know, I mean, first of all, dairy. I mean, dairy is really hard on. That's the worst thing to be eating. We are not little calves. We do not have renin, which is the enzyme that little calves have to break down casein, which is the main protein in milk. So when you're eating any dairy, I mean, people that are lactose intolerant are lucky, but essentially, casein is much more devastating than lactose ever would be, because all the diseases that little kids get, all the problems, all the runny noses and sore throats and earaches and tonsillitis and appendicitis and acne and type 1 diabetes, type 2, all these are all linked very clearly with dairy, with casein especially. Very powerful carcinogen, it's a huge, gigantic molecule we're not equipped to take care of. It just wreaks havoc on us, absolute havoc. And so, you know, but our bodies will do the best they can. That's the thing we have to understand. Our bodies are these miraculous, just miraculous. You know, whatever we eat, you know, the body will probably say something like, oh gosh, I hope you don't do that again. All right, but I'll do the best I can here, you know, and it just does the best it can to work with it. But if we feed ourselves what we're designed to be eating, then we don't have to cause all that kind of difficulty and have the problems that come from eating foods that we're not designed for. I mean, look at cows. They're eating more fish than we are. In many ways, they eat more meat than we do. Are cows designed to eat meat, you think? Well, obviously they're not, but you know, if you kept doing it generation after generation, after a while they'd say, yeah, we're designed to eat. And you have to realize they're not doing it because it's in their interest, they're doing it because it's in the interest of their exploiters. And it's really the same for us. It's not in our interest. It's in the interest of our exploiters that we eat meat. That's it. If you're eating meat and dairy, you're being exploited. There's no question about it. So to understand that we're not designed for this, and so the basic idea is simply this. All of us have been given the gift. It's very clear when we see this, of a physical body that doesn't require any animal to suffer to get all the nutrients we need to be healthy. But all of us have been born into a society where we've been forced from the time we're little infants to take that gift we've been given by the benevolent creator and throw it right back into his or her face and say, you know, we're going to stab and kill animals anyway. And when we do that, we essentially create a situation of violence towards animals and towards ecosystems and really towards ourselves and our own natural wisdom. And so the underlying idea is that as we move toward a more plant-based diet, and I would say while you're at it, probably it's a really good idea to have it basically organically grown as much as possible, because commercial agriculture is really devastating with to wildlife and so forth. And I would say while you're at it also, besides organic plant-based, also as much as possible a whole foods organic plant-based diet, because when we're eating processed foods that have you know, all kinds of preservatives and artificial chemicals and colors and all those things, it's not really a very good idea. So really to learn, and it's not that difficult to learn to cook with grains and vegetables and fruits and so forth, and we can create fabulous meals that are really the foundation of health for ourselves and for the earth and for our society. This is, I think, just an extremely important point to understand, that what we're eating is not only sending a huge message out into our society and into the earth, but also really to ourselves. What kind of a person am I? Who am I? What kind of a person am I? Am I a kind of a person who pays people to harm others and don't want to think about it? You know, or am I willing to actually take responsibility for my actions, or not? What kind of a person am I? What kind of a person am I? And to really be honest about that, you know, and if I'm not that kind of a person, then okay, I'm not. But to realize that all of us have been programmed at a very deep level to just be unaware, there's a big payoff in not being aware. And so if we're unaware, we can just be like everybody else, you know. So the idea is that there is a big payoff in that, but we pay a huge price as well. So I want to talk about that part of it now, just briefly, and then get into these other aspects. So the inner, so I've been talking about the outer ramifications of our food choices. The inner ramifications of our food choices essentially have to do, and this, I think the World Peace Diet is basically the only book that really goes into this in depth, that originated this, you know, this idea that when we eat animal foods, it's not only causing massive outer devastation, but it actually harms us on the inner level even more than it harms us on the outer level. On the inner level, what it is, first of all, we don't have to feel guilty about this in the sense that all of us, as I said, are injected from the time we're little infants with a certain mentality that makes us go along with this, right? We have to realize that we were born into a society that's been eating animal foods for a long time. And so any society wants to replicate itself, so everyone is essentially acculturated to go along with this. If you go to any grocery store and look at the little baby food jars, you'll see little jars of turkey and veal and chicken and cheese and all that. So the thing to understand is that there's a certain mentality that we have to have as human beings to go along with this, and the mentality is not in our best interest. I would say there's probably four main things. Number one is a mentality of disconnectedness. Every meal essentially is a ritual where we're taught at a very deep level to disconnect the reality that's on our plate from the reality that it took to get it onto our plate. We just learn early on to don't make the connections. Just stay shallow and don't look deeply. Don't listen deeply, don't feel deeply, don't understand deeply. And so when we do that with our meals, which are our most intimate connection with anything, is you don't get more intimate than eating something. It becomes the actual body. Like right now, what you're seeing talking to you is some broccoli and apples talking. That's just what they would say if they could talk, right? They would say just this. But the idea is that we're taught essentially to disconnect with every meal. And yet what we know is that intelligence is the capacity to make connections that are meaningful. So every meal essentially is dumbing us down, is making us unintelligent, is harming our intelligence, just making us masters. What's that saying, Madeline? You say it so well. Right, Madeline's a Swiss German. So Übung macht den Meister means practice makes the master. So every ritual we're practicing together in a group ritual, disconnecting. We just don't make the connections. Can you imagine on Sunday, maybe tomorrow morning, before people come to church, they're sitting around the breakfast table and they're drinking their coffee and having their orange juice and having some toast and maybe some scrambled eggs and a little bacon or something, and someone is eating their bacon and says, this bacon is good. I wonder what she was like. What do you mean, what she was like? Get out of here. We're not supposed to. We are so trained to not make the connections that if anyone were to do that, that would be a huge faux pas, right? You don't think about. Well, I'm just wondering. It's an animal. What her life was like, who she, what she was like, and yet it's a being. We would see. We see that we're just absolutely violated in a sense as human beings, as spiritual beings. By being raised in a society where we're forced to just stay shallow and not make connections. And so we create a whole society, and that's the thing. When you have a whole society of people who have been reliably trained with every single meal to stay shallow and disconnected, well, then you have a society who's been reliably trained to consume whatever products that are advertised to them, and they will reliably buy them. And they will also believe whatever news stories you manufacture and blast out through the media and through the TV, and they'll believe all that stuff too. They'll believe all the official stories, they'll buy the official things, and they'll go right along. They won't ask questions. Well, that's perfect. That's what you want, right? People who won't ask questions, who will stay shallow, who are disconnected, who will eat whatever you tell them to eat, and will just stay disconnected. So what veganism is essentially is saying, no, I want to know what I'm eating. I want to look deeply. I want to feel deeply. I want to understand deeply. I want to listen deeply. And when we do that, we create, as I said, a revolution of benevolence, of kindness, of love, of caring, of goodwill, of harmony, of freedom, of joy, of peace, of sustainability, of equality. We become a force for transformation because we're not going along with the program of violence and war and devastation, which is on our plates. That's the main place it is. And yet we're so afraid to look there because we don't want to be complicit, right? So the whole idea is, we have to take responsibility for our actions. So that's number one. Number two is a mentality, essentially, of privilege and elitism. The subtext of every meal, essentially, is certain beings are inherently superior, other beings are inherently inferior, and it's totally fine for the inherently superior beings to dominate and exploit and abuse however they want the inherently inferior beings. And we do it and we eat it. And we tell our kids it's okay to do it. So again, how can we expect to create a society of justice and equality when every single meal is a ritual teaching at the deepest level, nonverbal, just precognitive injection of a program of inequality, of might makes right, of privilege and elitism. So again, we have to understand that if we want to transform our society, we can do it, but not if we want to eat meat, dairy products, and eggs. Never happen, because that causes us to create a whole mentality of privilege, elitism, disconnectedness, exclusivism. Again, the essential idea in every meal is that we just exclude certain beings from the sphere of our kindness and compassion. Again, what veganism is and all these things is it's radical inclusion. It's saying I'm going to include all beings within the sphere of my kindness and compassion. I'm not going to only include certain ones. I'm going to include all beings in the sphere of my kindness and compassion. I'm going to care about everyone, all living beings, past, present, and future. Just open up our hearts and love every being. That's the call, really, of our true nature. We know at a deep level that we are essentially connected with others. And to actually honor that and to live that is an ethical demand that as we fulfill, it brings joy to us. It brings harmony, it brings love into our lives, it brings a sense of meaning and purpose. So those are a few of them. The other one, there's more, but I'll just maybe end there, except one more that's very important, which is every meal is also injecting into us another mentality, which I think in some ways is the most important of all in its detrimental effect, which is the domination of the sacred feminine. Essentially, every meal is telling us to just repress what I refer to in the World Peace Diet as Sophia. Sophia was the ancient Greek goddess of wisdom. Sophia means wisdom, and I used to teach courses in comparative religion. It's very interesting to see that around the world, the wisdom deities are typically goddesses, because there's an understanding that the feminine dimension of consciousness, and all of us, whether we are men or women, we have a feminine dimension, but at women I think it's more obvious, right? The enormous wisdom of a mother when she gives birth to a baby, and this yearning to love and protect and nurture the baby and to create an environment of love and support and so forth, and to protect the community and the family. This is the basic wisdom that allows our society to live. It's the wisdom that we're all called. I lived in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, for quite a few years in San Francisco. The word lama literally means, in Tibetan, la means precious, ma means mother, right? So lama means precious mother. And the whole idea is that a mother exemplifies the highest spiritual teaching in the sense that she's just loves unconditional, this unconditional love, this yearning to love and care for other beings. But every meal, when we're raised in a society where we're forced to eat meat, dairy products, and eggs, what that does, every single meal is just stomping on Sophia. It's repressing Sophia. It's repressing the feminine. It's repressing the sacred feminine in every one of us, in both men and women. And the other thing we have to realize, which I think is very easy to forget, and I didn't know this for a long time until I really researched the whole thing, is that animal agriculture looks like, and it's true, it's human beings dominating and exploiting animals. But that's only half the story. What it really is, it's men dominating and exploiting female animals. And then you have to really remember that. It's not about dominating animals, it's about dominating female animals. And you could not have animal agriculture at all without massive domination and abuse of the reproductive organs and cycles of female birds, mammals, and fish. That's what makes it happen. And so when people started animal agriculture about 10 or 12,000 years ago in what is today Iraq, it was men, and it was dominating female animals, and it was impregnating them against their will. And when they gave birth to a baby, it was stealing the baby and impregnating them again against their will. It was massive sexual abuse, violence, that ongoing. And so when you pull back the curtain of our society and you see what our society is based on, it's massive sexual violence against females. That's at the core of animal agriculture. That's what it is. And when we're eating that and we're feeding it to our kids, how can we ever create a society of equality and honoring women and the feminine when every meal is based on rape and killing of babies, and stealing of babies, and stealing of milk, and stealing of eggs? We have no right to do this. We steal everything from them. We steal their time, their lives, their products, everything. There's no respect at all. And so we have to realize we can live on this beautiful, abundant planet in harmony and freedom and joy and equality, but we have to be worthy of it. We have to extend to others what we would want to have for ourselves. As Jesus said, blessed are the merciful, for they shall obtain mercy. This is the basic teaching. It's just, we know that in our bones. This is how it's set up. There's nothing, how many of you have noticed, I'm sure you have living here in Tucson, how beautiful planet Earth is? Yeah, it's so beautiful. I mean, I feel so fortunate to live in an RV for 17 years and travel everywhere and be able to travel everywhere. But the thing that strikes me so much is when we just look with an eye that appreciates nature, we see such a celebration of life that is so beautiful. How plants, you plant a seed and thousands of seeds come up, and this abundance, this enormous abundance, this enormous celebratory quality, this, like it says in the Bible, and God beheld that it was good. This essential goodness of creation. It's so beautiful, abundant, the celebratory nature, and the benevolence really of the whole system. All of us should really feel this as a living reality deep inside of us. And yet, if we're raised in a society where we're eating meat, dairy products, and eggs, it's very difficult to feel that, because every day we're paying, and we don't want to think about the violence and horror, and then we eat that stuff, and we wonder why Hollywood is full of movies of horror and violence and brutality. We're eating it, we're paying for it, we're suppressing it. It's going to come out. It's called the shadow. I have a whole thing in the World Peace Diet about the shadow. The shadow is what we are, but we're not that. We're not that. Those bad people are that. We're not that. We're good people. They're the bad people. Look, if you're eating meat, dairy products, and eggs, we all do. We all have a huge shadow. The violence that we're causing is massive, but we don't want to look at it. So we have to realize that our spiritual liberation depends on liberating others. And it's not just about liberating those who, if you're, like if I hurt another human being, I may go to jail or I may get fined, so I'm not going to do that, right? But animals are completely vulnerable in our hands. You can do whatever you want to pigs and cows and chickens in our society. They're just property. They're just objects. You can harm them on a massive scale and be very well respected. So we have to realize that even though the animals do not retaliate, they can't retaliate. You can do whatever you want to these animals, and you don't get sued. They don't rise up into a class action lawsuit against us. They don't get back at us somehow. They just suffer at our hands. They just bawl. I've heard them. How many of you have heard dairy cows bawling when their babies are stolen? On any dairy, organic or not, they're always stolen immediately. And so these mothers are bawling, and the cows are crying for their mothers, and then we impregnate them again on a rape rack, and we steal them again. They suffer, but they don't retaliate. But what we have to understand is that absolutely our violence towards them always retaliates. Don't think we escape. Our violence towards them, it does retaliate. It comes in all kinds of ways. It's physical disease, psychological disease, cultural disease, terrorism. How can we live in a society of joy and abundance and harmony when we're not acting that way towards those who are vulnerable in our hands? This is the great test of human beings, and we've been failing it miserably. However, the good news is we are beginning to awaken. And I think what veganism is essentially is that the resurrection of Sophia. It's the resurrection of the sacred feminine within humanity, within individuals, and within society. It's a resurrection of intelligence, of wisdom, of compassion, of awareness. There are so many more ideas I'd really like to share with you, but I know it's hot in here, and you're all sitting in these uncomfortable chairs, and I've been talking for just about an hour. And so as a vegan, I don't like to cause unnecessary suffering to other sentient beings. I don't have to create that karma. So I'd be happy to, I guess what I'll do here is just give a very brief overview of a few of the other main points, and then talk a little bit about, well, actually, then maybe open up to questions. If you have questions about some of the ramifications of these ideas in terms of how to live, I'd love to get into some of those things, because that's really interesting. But the basic, just in a nutshell, these ideas are foundational to our understanding, and these ideas are foundational in the World Peace Diet. There's also, the basic ideas of the history of this, how this actually opened up, and again, there's a whole chapter on that. It's fascinating because we tend to think that, well, this is how it's always been, but when we really look deeply, and I already talked about it a little bit, when we look back 8 or 10,000 years ago, and we see what happened when people first started herding animals, owning animals as property for food in what is today apparently northeastern Iraq. And this culture began to spread, and it spread. It spread all over the whole world now. But it was basically 4 or 5 things happened. It created the arising of a wealthy elite class. It created the arising of a patriarchal society, of the domination of women. It created war. The very first word for war is the old Sanskrit word gavya, that means the desire for more cows. Anyone who owned cows, they saw somebody else that had a lot of cows, were capital. The word capita means head. That's wealth, is the head of cows, sheep, and goats. And so they would attack somebody else, and whoever lost the war. It was also the creation of the institution of slavery. Whoever lost the war became the slave. One of the things I realized in all my research into the World Peace Diet is something that should be sobering to us, which is that whatever we have done to animals, sooner or later, we have also done to human beings. Always. I mean, always, always, always. So we shouldn't be doing, microchipping and a lot of the other things if we don't want to have it done to us. So essentially, we have to realize that war, slavery, domination of women, a bellicose society that basically where the wealthy elite eats a lot of meat and dairy, this society has spread, and it's spread, and we're born into that society today. It's still spreading through the large multinational corporations, ConAgra, Monsanto, Cargill, Burger King, all these corporations, as well as the IMF and the World Bank and the large financial institutions. I refer to all this whole big thing as the military, industrial, meat, medical, pharmaceutical media complex. And this complex essentially is very good at sucking wealth away from people and into the hands of a tiny elite. But what our idea, the idea for us as human beings is to somehow just understand this and then create ways, I think, where we can create communities of sanity, communities of kindness and caring, grow food locally, support local economies, support your local farmers markets and CSAs, support ways of educating each other about these ideas, having like a UU animal ministry where we talk about these ideas in a way where we can act, where people who are open to these ideas can understand these ideas. We can create communities of sanity, because obviously the only reason anyone eats meat, dairy products, and eggs is because of the communities they're raised in, right? I was raised in Concord, Massachusetts. I mean, as a Unitarian, I came from like the place, right? I learned to swim in Walden Pond. I went to Thoreau School. I was born in Emerson Hospital. I went to Alcott School, right? And so I'm like Mr. Unitarian. But the idea is that, you know, I was raised eating the usual meat, dairy products, and eggs, and I never questioned it. I couldn't. There was no way. When I was 7 years old, I said to my mother, "Mom, the kind of food we're eating, is this what everybody eats?" My mother said, "Yeah, everybody eats this. It's what everybody eats." And then she came back a few minutes later. She said, "Well, there are vegetarians." You know, and she said it in this way that I knew these people lived far away. and she said, "You'll never meet one." She said, "I've never met one. I'm a lot older than you are. You'll never." They're hypothetical people, because where do they get their protein? You know, they don't really exist. Maybe on another dimension somewhere. And my mother was totally right. And I went away to the summer camp in Vermont, and we killed our own chickens, we killed our own cow. There was a dairy farm, and when the cow doesn't give enough milk, we put a gun to her head and pulled the trigger. One of these nice little, beautiful little dairy farms nestled in the Green Mountains of Vermont where nothing bad could ever happen. Believe me, if you're a cow, a lot of bad things happen. If you're a chicken, a lot of bad things happen. You know, it's death and killing. That's what it is. It's all about that. It's all about domination and killing. But anyway, I still couldn't quite get it. I was 13 years old. I did all that. I thought, oh, that's what you have to do. That's what Jesus wants you to do. That's what we're supposed to do. And I remember, but eventually, just to make this very brief, I went away to college. I started questioning things somewhat. It was in the early 1970s, the Vietnam War era and all that. And then I left home and decided to go to California. I got as far as Buffalo, New York, and my brother, and we walked south down through upstate New York and Pennsylvania, West Virginia, Kentucky, into Tennessee, and we ended up at a community in Tennessee called The Farm, which was the largest hippie commune in the world back in 1975. And they were all, about 1,000 people, mostly from California, and they were totally vegetarian. They were actually vegans. No one heard of the word vegan in 1975, so they said, we're vegetarians. But for me, just seeing this community, just seeing and living with 1,000 people who were eating meals, and we were eating meals together of meat, of vegetables and grains and so forth. That was it. I never have eaten meat again in my life. I asked the guy why they were doing that, and he said, well, there's a lot of starvation in the world, and we wanted to create a world of peace, so we're eating low in the food chain. And he said, and do you know what the animals go through? And he explained to me just briefly that the animals that we're eating are mutilated in a variety of ways, and he talked about how their beaks are chopped off, and their tails are cut off, and they're castrated without anesthesia, and their babies are stolen, this whole thing. And it was like he pulled the curtain back, kind of like in The Wizard of Oz. He just pulled it, and I just saw it. And it was like I had this lens where I could actually see the terrible hell realms we force billions of animals into, and how violent it is, and how disgusting and horrible. And at the same time, I had this wonderful example of a community that was not doing that. And they were not dying of a protein deficiency. They were thriving. They had probably 200 children, vegan from birth. They were thriving. They were doing great. So that was it. I said, okay, I'll never eat meat. I'm not going to eat meat anymore. And I have never eaten meat, and that since that day in 1975. So that's, what is that, 40 years ago. And like I said, I found out years later when I met Madeline in Switzerland, and we talked about, when did you? And I found out it was the same month and year anyway that she never ate meat again in her life in Switzerland. And then 5 years later, I discovered the violence towards dairy cows and hens, and for dairy and eggs. So I became a vegan in 1980. I was in California at that point. And then a few years later, I went to Songwangsa, to a Zen monastery in Korea. I shaved my head. I lived as a Zen monk there. And I found myself in a community, it was obviously a spiritual community, it was a Zen monastery in South Korea that had been practicing what we would call veganism for, well, since the 1200s, I think it was about 650 years. So I realized that veganism is not this newfangled hippie idea from California. It's actually an ancient Buddhist, or actually spiritual teaching within all the world religions. If you look, I think, carefully at the core of all the world religions, you'll see the teaching of ahimsa, which means nonviolence. The basic teaching that we will never be happy, we'll never be free, we will never create a society that's worth living in, really, until we practice ahimsa, which is learning to treat others with kindness and respect. All beings who have interests, to treat them with kindness and respect. We're raised in a society where we're taught not to do that. So for me, I was in this monastery. We never talked about, in the monastery, we never talked about, the teachings of ahimsa or veganism. It was a silent retreat. We didn't talk about anything. So but basically, for me, it was this opportunity. I had already been living in meditation centers, for many years in this country, and so it was just sitting in meditation from 3 o'clock in the morning till 9 o'clock at night every single day. On lotus on the floor, and just going deeper and deeper to connect with the essential core nature of what it is to be a human being, to be aware, to who are we, to just find out who we are. And I think if we pursue that question deeply enough, we will get a glimpse, perhaps, that what we are essentially is infinite and eternal consciousness. That what we are essentially is of the nature of loving kindness and compassion and wisdom and caring, and that we come here and we, in a sense, we're manifesting through a physical vehicle, and we have a purpose. And our purpose is to bring forth our unique message and to awaken to the truth that we are, and to bless the world with our unique powers that we have. And if we're doing that, and if we're actually living our life from our intuition, from our inner wisdom, then we're going to be questioning the official stories of our culture. We're going to realize that we've been born essentially into a cultural program that is not in our best interest at all. It's essentially a program of enslavement. And to liberate ourselves from that requires us to question the core teaching, which is the food. That's it. The food, eating meat, dairy products, and eggs is it. That's it. When we're eating meat, dairy products, and eggs, and we're eating the products of violence and slavery of female animals and children, and we're paying for that, and we're responsible, and we're actually eating it, then we are enslaved. There's no question about it. So if we want to actually be a force for healing, no longer be part of the problem, but be part of the solution, the whole thing is to just do the best we can to understand what's going on. And then when we understand it, do the best we can to respond to that in a way that is authentic for us. And I think when we do that, we begin to create a field around us as individuals and as a community that actually can help raise the level of consciousness so that we can actually live on this beautiful planet the way we are intended to, celebrating our lives with joy and freedom and abundance, the enormous abundance. There's plenty here for everybody. And the problem is when you have a situation where a few take everything for themselves, and that's what it's all about. Animal agriculture is all about that. Believe me, I mean, I could talk a lot longer, but those are the main points. And then the final thing, there's a chapter on the metaphysics of food. There's chapters that go into the objections people have. There's chapters that go into essentially the enormous positivity of the message, which I'll just end with here, that we can create alternative communities, and that I think as each one of us makes an effort to understand these things, we create the possibility of a way that we human beings can live on this earth the way we're intended to. I think it's totally within our reach. And people say, well, how long is it going to take? When are we going to get there? Are we ever going to get there? Or will we destroy the whole planet before we ever get there? And I say, well, it's up to you. It really is. It's up to us. I mean, it's up to our choices and to how we show up in the world. How do we show up? Do we want to show up as a clone of a violent culture and just say, well, I'm a robot. I was programmed. I'm going to do what I'm told and just not ask questions and just do what I'm told? Or are we going to be authentic and use our intuition, use our spiritual wisdom, and use our inner guidance and speak our truth wherever it takes us? And I think we see more and more people doing that. And the beauty is that when we do that, I think we automatically create a field of freedom around us. And when we come together as a community, then that helps everyone do the same thing. So I'd like to open it up for questions now and just see what kind of questions you may have about how we can live this actually in our daily lives. Because people sometimes say, well, how does it work practically? In practical terms, okay, I understand all this, but what do I do? So yes, Ashok.
Well, I remember, I'm kind of paraphrasing this, but Mahatma Gandhi once said that if we want peace in our world, we need to start with the children.
Yes.
And I feel very strongly about that. I'm a child psychiatrist, and that's one of the things I love working with kids.
So you're a child psychologist, and you think peace starts with the children.
Right. But I think we're not teaching our kids early enough before they're getting brainwashed.
Right.
We brainwash them with all these horrible commercials and
right.
the meat industry, and fast food and stuff.
So we're brain